Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Let's start talking about your psychology, issues you may be going through, whether to make a New Year's resolution. I guess since it's New Year's, Happy New Year. Should you even make a New Year's resolution, or what New Year's resolution to make? I think that's what learning more about your psychology could help you with. I mean, my thing with New Year's resolutions is don't try to do anything that you haven't done before. Chances are you've already done something in your past. Maybe in the past month, the past 6 months maybe, that could really help you out and you simply stop doing it. It's amazing. It's amazing how much we do something and it works and it feels really good and our life is better and just everything falls in a line and then we stop doing it. Now, there may be some shame, self-sabotage, secondary emotional payoff as we talk about. But if you're going to pick a New Year's resolution, don't try to do anything that you haven't done before. It's not going to work. You're not going to stick to it. Let me spoil that for you. But what you may be able to do is something very simple that you can already have done before and you can do, and it can be a huge benefit to your life. And if you don't really know what that is, what could be a huge benefit to your life? That's the point of therapy. That's, at least I would say, what you're supposed to get out of therapy. Where are the pressure points? You have this huge, complicated psychology. Where are the pressure points? Where can I push? And, the thing about the pressure point analogy, if it's a few centimeters off, then it's not going to matter. It's a few centimeters off. You could push with 10 times more effort. It's not going to matter. Effort isn't going to be the thing. Let's figure out exactly what's going on. Push exactly at this point, and exactly at that point, and it almost doesn't matter how lightly you press it. It doesn't. I got this thing on the back of my left hamstring. You don't have to press that hard for it to hurt. I think it might be a sciatic nerve issue. You don't have to press that hard for it to hurt. And that's what I want you to do with your psychology. Don't try to do anything for the New Year's that you haven't done before. You're just setting yourself up to beat yourself up, to put yourself in the state of self-criticism. Anything you have to work on, just don't. You need awareness. If you think you have to work on something, you need awareness. In fact, what I would challenge you need more of is focus. In a way, light focus on the right things is going to be more difficult than work. The work could, in fact, be a distraction from the issue that you're really facing. Once you zero in, and it's probably has something to do with the last thing that you want to talk about. It's probably could be a good indication of what the issue is and where you need to press on the pressure point. Once you have that figured out, then it's like just relax, subtle focus, something that you can do every day and will have long-term effects in the future. It's like you had a credit card debt. You call the credit card company and you set up some kind of automatic payment system. But once you set up the debt's not paid, but you've set up the payment system, okay, take this much out of my paycheck every couple weeks. It's over. You're doing it, even though it's not really done. And I think that's where we can get a lot of people with their psychology. But this comes from awareness. Hopefully we can help you with some kind of awareness this week. Awareness of what narcissism is and what neurosis is in general, and the state of psychology, and the nature of what a neurotic issue is. Let's get into it. This was from last week. Scott Adams said something, the Dilbert cartoonist, he's getting involved, he's talking politics now, which, boy, he really shouldn't be. That's one thing that I challenge everybody out there to get really good at one thing. Just to focus on one thing and know a lot about it. Not only do you know a lot about that thing, but then you've realized not how difficult it is, but just how many variables are at play in any field of knowledge. So when it comes to having an opinion about something that you're not really well groomed at, you tend to not have such an opinion. I think that's Scott Adams talking about politics, and here psychology. He says that narcissism isn't a real thing. It's something that people with low self-esteem use to criticize people who have high self-esteem. Which is kind of funny. And that's not really true in the case of narcissism, but that is kind of true in the idiomatic use of that word on Twitter. Like I think a lot of people will call Trump a narcissist for things that aren't even narcissistic. I mean, clearly. I mean, he may have a high view of himself, but that in no way is narcissism. But people will call him that. In a sense, what people are saying is, oh, if I would do that, I would feel silly. Well, yeah. But you have probably a lower self-esteem. So you're, in a sense, denigrating Trump. Again, I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't want to make this a political show at all. I may be a Trump supporter. I may not be. It doesn't matter. But people will denigrate Trump. Or just anybody who is famous, successful, that's how we denigrate them. And I had that good tweet, I think it was yesterday. If you're criticizing a successful person for a trait that they have, chances are, now not all the time, right? It's a tweet. It's fun. Now not all the time, but chances are you may need that trait, the exact trait you're criticizing somebody else for. You may need that to be more successful in whatever you're doing, especially if that successful person is successful in the same field that you are in. So you're criticizing Trump for attracting a lot of attention to himself. Well, I'm not saying you got to be like Trump, but maybe that's a sign you need to be more comfortable having attention on you. So Scott Adams made this claim about narcissism and how it's not a real thing, and he made it clear that he's not talking about the idiomatic use of narcissism. He's saying the clinical expression or the clinical definition of narcissism is bogus. It's a junk definition, and let's go into what he has to say. Well, first I'll say Scott Barry Kaufman, who is a somewhat famous psychologist on Twitter. How do I describe Scott Barry Kaufman? He is a human SEO keyword list. That's what Scott Barry Kaufman is. He is like the Google of psychologists. He just has this way of, seemingly, from my perspective, just conglomerating, amalgamating what everybody wants a psychologist to be, or what everybody focuses on, right? SEO keyword, what they search when it comes to psychologists, and he incorporates those keywords into his personality, which from my perspective just comes off him looking like a complete inauthentic nothing, with nothing really helpful to say. It's like I was talking about that unified theory of psychology with from Greg Enriquez. Nothing wrong there, but just not correct enough to be useful, right? Overfitting versus underfitting. And that's how I see Scott Barry Kaufman. Which, okay, so now I'm criticizing somebody who's more successful than I am, especially in the field that I'm in. So I probably do need to incorporate some of that into my personality. Whew, that's going to take a lot of therapy, though, so we'll see. So Scott Barry Kaufman comes in and criticizes Scott Adams and says, okay, well, we'll just go on what you think narcissism is, Scott Adams, and forget all the science, right? Forget all the science. I think you probably know where I'm going with. If you listen to more than 2.5 minutes of any Animus hair episode, you probably know where I'm going with this. Forget all the science about narcissism. We'll just defer to what you think, to your gut intuition about what narcissism is. And of course, this is going to leave, and this just exemplifies everything wrong with psychology, everything wrong with the criticism of psychology, everything wrong with psychology, and ultimately why people have a difficult time seeing their problem for what it is. If you do happen to be a narcissist or have narcissistic traits, this completely, this kind of conversation about psychology, or narcissism more specifically, neurosis, complexes, it makes obvious sense. Right? It makes obvious sense why people look at the psychology industry and think, man, what a racket. And it's true. The way that it's run now, it is a racket. It's represented by Scott Barry Kaufman, who thinks that you can break down narcissism as like the scientific thing that you can observe. You can't. So what Scott Adams does, I watched some of his Periscope. Do I need to be on Periscope, by the way? Would that be? I would be on Periscope, but all those hearts that come up the side, that just looks really stupid to me. I don't know. It probably doesn't matter. So Scott Adams goes on Periscope and then offers a defense that narcissism doesn't exist from his own perspective in a way that Scott Barry Kaufman would not be able to defend against. And what does Scott Adams say? He says, well, this is an observer problem, which some kind of inherent subjectivism. Like, the observer problem is, oh, that's how you see, in this case, narcissism, but that's based on your own perception, right? This is some Kantian way of looking at the world. That's just based on your perception. That's just your worldview. There's often people's, again, clearly Scott Adams is outside his wheelhouse here of drawing comics, because, this is what people say when they've taken 1 or maybe 2 psychology classes, or philosophy classes, excuse me. That's what you take after that's what you start saying after your first philosophy classes. You invoke some kind of postmodernism view of the world. Oh, well, that's just your perspective. Well, we just all have different opinions on things. Who's really to say what's one way or another? It's all based on you, the observer. That's the observer problem. If you're defining narcissism, that's inherently a problem, because it's you defining it. It's not some objective third party, some human third party outside of the interaction. It's always going to be somebody in the interaction who has some kind of bias. Yeah, when you start studying philosophy, you definitely get dumber before you get smarter. That's the thing. You got to you can't just study it a little bit, because you'll just get dumb. It's like a bell curve, and the curve is dumbness. And then over time, you start off smart, you get dumb, but you keep studying and you get even smarter. And then that's what Scott Adams is going through here, I think. So what are some indications of narcissism? One would be the need for excessive attention, and of course Scott Adams' argument against this is, well, what makes it excessive? For what purpose? That's just based on the therapist, on the psychologist's opinion. It may be excessive for them, but not for somebody else. Trouble with relationships. Trouble by what standards? How do you determine what is a troubled relationship? Don't we all have troubled relationships to some degree? What's the even point? What's the point of even trying to come up with diagnosing somebody as, oh, you have trouble in your relationships, or excessive trouble, lack of empathy? Oh, how do you measure empathy? Right? This is the problem with people thinking that psychology is a science. And the Scott Barry Kaufmans of the world, the famous psychologist, relatively famous for psychologists, out there and defending it as a science, because then somebody will say, well, where's empathy? Now, I can see mitochondria, I can see a nucleus, and actually I can tell the difference between a nucleus and a mitochondria. It's not some sliding grayscale. That is definitely a nucleus, that's definitely in a mitochondria. It's not like, well, that's a really big mitochondria. That might be a nucleus. No, it's just a mitochondria, or that's a really small, weak nucleus. It might be a mitochondria. No, that's a nucleus. There's definitions to this. And then vulnerability to criticism. Well, how do you tell? This is Scott Adams talking. How do you tell, aren't we all vulnerable to criticism? How can you say somebody has vulnerability to criticism in a way that hurts them? That's just from your perspective. That's the observer problem. And this look, Scott Adams, I know I just criticized him at the beginning. He's right. He's right. In the context of psychologists going around saying, hey, we have scientific observation of what a narcissist is, no different than any hard science like biology or chemistry or physics. That leaves the door way open for somebody like Scott Adams, who is just not that intelligent from my perspective. I don't know, maybe he is. Just not that intelligent from my perspective. Not intelligent enough to know, I got famous for writing comics, which is good. That's could arguably way more helpful to the society than being a psychologist. Maybe I'm not going to give a definite opinion on anything else besides this thing that I know. But Scott Barry Kaufman comes in and claims it's scientific, which makes psychology as a field look completely silly, and it's not, right? It's a philosophy, and all a philosophy is, and I guess to put it in the context of science, philosophy. So science looks at reality, looks at concrete reality for its observation. Philosophy does the same thing. Instead of looking at concrete reality, it looks at concepts, looks at abstractions. But where do we get concepts and abstractions from? This is a difficult philosophical issue that, I'm sorry, you got to go back and read Aristotle. You got to take an Aristotle weed-out course. If you don't do that, then you're not going to understand how concepts can, in fact, have more validity than the reality we derive the concepts from in certain cases. But this comes from concept formation. This comes from proper integration. And that's where we can get a reasonable definition for what narcissism is, in a way that you can't just come around and say, oh, well, but by this definition of narcissism, anybody could be a narcissist. Or how do you even determine what's enough empathy? Let's go back. How would somebody be diagnosed as a narcissist? Well, first, let's go back to even before that. Why would we even have a diagnosis of a narcissist, of a narcissistic personality disorder? Why would we have this? Is it because it's useful? Is it because it describes something specifically going on in the person? No, but it can be a healthy classification of what somebody may be going through. And it's mostly for insurance companies. So there's that whole insurance problem there. So we can't really talk about diagnosing somebody as a narcissist, of the therapist sitting there in the clinic and saying, I, the therapist, am diagnosing you, the client, the patient, as the narcissist. You can't really have that discussion without talking about, okay, I'm kind of getting off track, without talking about the insurance industry and how they're the ones who essentially write the DSM. That's not written for psychologists. That's written for insurance companies and lawyers. But barring all that, why would somebody come in and be diagnosed as a narcissist? Well, because they have a problem in their life and they go and see a psychologist because of that. Right? It's the context in which the client comes in and says, yeah, I think I might have a problem. Now, I know a lot of people, may go into the clinic and talk about their presenting problem, the situation that they're in. And really, of course, as we know here at Animus, the situation that you're in is really just a reflection of your psychology. So you may have the problem with the mother-in-law, to take it a typical example. But the problem really is not with your mother-in-law, it's really with you. Now, you can argue that people come in the clinic and they can really think the problem is about their mother-in-law, and the problem with a lot of therapists is they won't disabuse them of this false view of their issue. But I tend to think that when people come in, when people go to get therapy, yes, they're pissed at their mother-in-law, they're pissed at their boyfriend and girlfriend, but a part of them thinks, just in my experience, I got to tell you, it's a part of everybody thinks, the problem's with me. Yeah, this is a me problem. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to, maybe complain about the mother-in-law for the first 3 sessions just because it feels good and I'm going to get attention and some validation. But ultimately, I know if that's where it ends, then it's not really that helpful. And a lot of people, I think, seek me out for therapy because I think they at least get the impression that I'm not going to blame their mother-in-law. I'm not going to blame them either. Nobody's to blame. It's nobody's fault. It's just, let's look at what's going on. And part of that, what's going on, may be your responsibility. So somebody comes into the clinic, they think they may have a problem. And so what? You present with some symptoms. Yeah. So you present with some symptoms that are not helping you, that are not helping you get what you want in life. And specifically, on just a very concrete way, if you want to make this as concrete and scientific as possible, you are not doing things that you want to do. There are basic needs in your life that are going unmet, and you do not know how to get these needs met. And a lot of people, they don't have the problem of, oh, you got to lower your expectations. I think a lot of people need to raise their expectations. Just some basic communication, emotional needs, you can't get those met. Okay, so what could be the issue? Well, you need excessive attention and admiration. That could be something that gets in the way of you and getting what you want, an emotional connection. Let's just use that as an example. It's going to be an easy one. Lack of empathy. Okay, lack of empathy. You have difficulty with criticism. Okay, so it's going to be difficult for you to create a connection with people because when you go in to create a connection with somebody, yeah, you want to create a connection with somebody, but also you want to protect yourself from criticism. So there's going to be this push-pull, and it's going to be difficult to connect, and you're not going to get what you want, and that's going to manifest in a bunch of other, most likely obsessive thoughts, compulsive behavior kind of symptoms. You're going to be tuned out on the internet because of your inability to connect. So now let's look at these, and there's more, right? There's more symptoms of narcissism, but let's just look at these 4. Okay, lack of empathy, trouble in relationship, need for excessive attention, vulnerability with criticism. Again, this goes back to the integration. This goes back to concept formation. What is similar about all these? Now, I'm not going to get into this now. You guys know what I think. Lack of boundary, right? What could possibly be similar with all these? And what does this say about the nature of our psychology? What does this say about the nature of the human? How do we integrate this into a definition of narcissism that, of course, it's not going to be a scientific definition. Of course, it's not going to be something that we can look through a microscope like a mitochondria or nucleus in a cell. But we can look through it by understanding the proper role of philosophy, which psychology is completely out to lunch on. The Scott Barry Kaufmans of the world. Why? Because nobody Googles, right? Go back to the SEO. Nobody Googles philosophy of psychology. Nobody Googles Aristotle psychology. Nobody Googles, I don't know, fundamental principles. Well, people may actually Google that. Right? What do they Google? They Google positive psychology. They Google affirmation psychology. They Google guy with a nice haircut psychology. So the Scott Barry Kaufmans of the world, and again, I understand, I'm criticizing him. I probably need to integrate some of this for me to be more successful. But the Scott Barry Kaufmans of the world just look at that and, well, I'm just going to be that. I'm going to be what people want me to be. Not what psychology needs. Not breaking down psychology to first principles. Principles without which there couldn't be psychology in the first place. And now we have really strengthened. We have really bolstered this field. So when the Scott Adams of the world come around and they take one philosophy class and go, well, how do you measure empathy? You go, what are you talking about? We're not measuring empathy. We are in a deep connection with one person, with a client. They're paying us. First of all, they've got to a place in their life where they're in a lot of pain to go to a therapist, especially now. You know, all the stigma around the field, which of course the Scott Barry Kaufmans of the world will go, oh, why is there this stigma around therapy? Because somebody like Scott Adams, who has no training in your field whatsoever, comes across and completely obliterates it in the context of the argument. He completely obliterates you. Oh, why is there this stigma around therapy? Because you can't defend it. You do not have the epistemological framework to defend it. And it's only when we can look at defending psychology for what it is, looking at narcissism for what it is, that we can do anything about it. When we break it down to fundamental principles of how your psychology operates in a boundary, as a boundary. Okay, narcissism is, in a sense, a weak boundary. It is one specific manifestation of a weak boundary. There's other manifestations, it's very similar to, Syndrome X, right? The disease of civilization. You're eating a lot of flour. You don't have enough omega-3s, not enough healthy fats. So you're going to get sick in some way. Now, whether that's diabetes or heart disease or obesity or some kind of renal failure, that's going to depend on your biological constitution. Some people, when they have a weak boundary, they may just present as some kind of codependence. What I would argue, generally speaking, a less egregious form of narcissism, or BPD, a more egregious form of narcissism. Where was I going with that? But so why is there a stigma against therapy? Because you get blown out of the water. Because you're not looking at what narcissism is. Yeah, so it's when we look at this, that's why I think this debate between, it's not really much of a debate, but this discussion between Scott Adams, Scott Barry Kaufman is so important, because the inability to get at the root of the issue here is exactly why when you go into therapy now, they can't get to the root of the issue. All you do is you talk about feelings, you talk about emotions. It doesn't go anywhere. They open you up, so to speak, but they do not sew you back together. And that's why I think people have a difficult time with this. And if there is an epidemic of narcissism right now, I wouldn't be surprised if there is. We'll get to it. I've got a couple questions here I'm going to get to. It's because of this issue. It's because we don't even know what narcissism is. On the one hand, we think it's nothing, and we think that because on the other hand, well, the Scott Barry Kaufmans, the popular psychologists of the world, think it's a scientific term, which is definitely not. Maybe one day it will be. In fact, I was just reading No, I'm not going to get it. Just reading a passage from Jung talking about this exact thing. And yeah, it's in his phenomenology of fairy tales, something like that. Archetypes and fairy tales. And he says, look, in a sense, maybe psychology will be a science one day. And he's criticizing Moon. I'm criticizing Scott Barry Kaufman, he's criticizing Moon. Maybe it'll be a science one day, but we're not there. We have to look at this as, in a sense, a phenomenology. We have to look at this as a philosophy. Where scientists would look at hard, concrete facts about the world, we need to look at concepts, we need to look at integrations, we need to get very clear. Yeah, as clear as a biologist is about a mitochondria, about its existence and where it is and pointing to it. We need to get that clear about concepts. This is going to take a philosophical feat that, to be quite honest, not a lot of psychologists are up to at this point. But that's what we can do here. I think that's one way we can help you out. And to go back to what I was talking about before, understanding the neurosis, the complex for what it is, it's going to show you, you get a picture of it, you bring awareness to it, and then it's obvious. Oh yeah, here's the pressure point. Oh, that's easy. I just have to push there. Well, then it's easy to come up with a New Year's resolution. Just something that you've probably done in the past. You just got to be consistent about it. All right. So I hope that made some kind of sense. If not, I hope it put you to sleep. Let's start. Let's get to your questions. I got 2 here. Well, I got 4 this week. I think the 2 of the questions, guys, I really appreciate them, and I will get to them. I think I'm going to do a separate video on them. And one of them about the cultural divide in America and what it really means philosophically. I mean, that could be a presentation. I may go back and I do a bunch of slides on that. So I will get to that, but it's going to be too complicated to go into now. So the 2 questions I'll get to today is, the first one is, are books a viable alternative to group? And this listener does not mean self-help books, rather memoirs, biographies, autobiographies. So what's the purpose of group? Why do I always talk about going to group? What do you do there? You relate with people. You see what they're going through. It's difficult to look at ourselves. That's why we go into therapy. The first 3 sessions, we complain about our mother-in-law, even though we know that's not really, we know that's the problem isn't the mother-in-law. It's how we relate with the mother-in-law. But it's just easier to look at somebody else and to see what they're going through. Because looking at ourselves, it's just too painful. And we always have caveats and, well, I'm like that, but also I have this special thing about me which makes me special. In a way you are special, and you do have a unique experience of the genuine human experience, of the overall authentic human experience, and that's what individuation is. But so we go in a group and listen to other people talk, and at first we think it's crazy and they're a bunch of losers, and that's true. There are a bunch of losers in group, that's for sure. But you listen to what I say and you just believe me, right? Hear me now, believe me later. You go in and relate with these people, and you will gradually start to hear people talk about you. They're talking about themselves, but you're like, wait a minute, that's what I go through. Oh, that's how they deal with it. That's how they experience it. Now this is creating a more complete tapestry, a more complete tableau for my life, for my psychic life. I'm going to start to put the pieces together, gain awareness, and now I'm going to figure out where to put the pressure points. It's going to be that much more simple to do. So that's the purpose of group. But I think what this listener is asking is, well, I can relate to people's memoirs and biographies and autobiographies. Isn't that a great alternative to group if I don't really want to go to group? I think is the implication here. And I would say, boy, if that was right, if reading biographies or reading novels, that's what's so great about somebody like Hugo is these complex characters, and Dostoevsky, of course, Brothers Karamazov. I mean, who cannot relate to all those 3 brothers? They're just different aspects of each individual person, of every person who's ever lived. That's what the 3 brothers are encapsulation of. But yeah, I mean, if this was true, then I would have been, you're basically describing my 21st year on this planet. Is, well, I'm not going to talk. I don't need friends. Who needs? I had friends, but I don't really need to talk to people and be social. I'm just going to read Hugo. I'm going to read Notre Dame. I'm going to read Les Miserables and The Man Who Laughs. I'm going to relate with Gwynplaine. this is going to be my emotional development. So yeah, if this worked, if reading books, and again, we're not talking self-help books. We know that's not going to work. But if reading memoirs and biographies work, then yeah, I would have been the most wise man in the world by the time I was 23. No, and the thing I would just tell you be careful with here, dear listener, is be careful of relief. Like, going back to the anxiety diagram, I think there's a link still. I put a link in the description to how anxiety works. Go back to the anxiety diagram. Where is the most damaging place or the worst place to be overall long-term on the anxiety diagram? Well, it's not confidence, right? I mean, that's the place you want to be. You want to confront your anxiety, and then you get what I would approximate to be confidence. You don't want to, it's not, but it's also not helplessness, victimhood, persecution, martyrdom, and it's also not avoidance of anxiety. Although in the short term, those are ostensibly worse. What I would say is the worst place to be, and where people get stuck the most, is relief. Right? It's just somewhere, you're still conscious, it's somewhere in between helplessness and confidence. You're kind of confronting your anxiety. You're not totally avoiding it. You're kind of confronting the anxiety, and that's what reading memoir and biography is. Like especially if you're doing it for the purpose of emotional awareness. So you're confronting the issue. The issue here, generally speaking, is your lack of emotional awareness. You're confronting it, but not really. Right? And that's what leaves you in relief. So you feel fine, but you're not really doing what you need to do, which is look at somebody in the face and relate with them and create a relationship with them based on the fact that you can relate with them. Now, that's the challenge. That's the scary part. That's what makes it difficult. And, go back to what I say in the magazine, in issue 1 and 2. I think I say it in both 1 and 2. But we do not have the brains that we have. We are not conscious. I know there's a bunch of great explanations for why humans are conscious. I think drug use is one. Sexual communication. Why do we have the brains that are this big? But I think another reason is just, very similar to sexual communication, just creating complex relationships with somebody. You will not become conscious by yourself. You need a face there. There is something therapeutic about having a face there. Like, I think journaling is great, but if you don't take what you're journaling about and talking to somebody about it, preferably a therapist at first, therapist, priest, social worker, whatever you have available, some confidential setting, it's just amazing. In fact, in an Animus group, somebody was just saying it, and I think this a lot too, because I go to my own group. Yeah, by the way, the group doesn't have to be in person. I've been doing a Zoom group with my group that I attend, since COVID, and I don't know. In a lot of ways, it's not in a lot of ways, but in some ways, it's better. You know what you can do when you're in a Zoom group is you can put it on speaker mode, right, or in speaker view. So when somebody's speaking, or you can just pin the person you're speaking. Can people see when you pin them? I hope not, because they're going to think I'm weird. But when somebody's speaking, you either pin them or put it on speaker view, and their face fills up the whole screen. And you can just stare, like the face is right there. How close can you get? I'm just looking at you, dude. I'm looking at the guy who's talking. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what I'm going through. I know you're only talking about you. But I just got to pick up on just subtle emotional cues and what you're thinking and what you're saying and the subtext of what you're saying. Let me know. You're painting my tableau for me. You're filling it in. You're filling in all the gaps. You're creating lighting. You're like veneering by the painting of my psychology. I mean, you're putting in lighting there that I didn't even know I could do. Like my retina couldn't pick up on. I need to see your retina. I need to use your, what's it called? Oculus Obscurum. Go watch Tim's Vermeer. Probably is it the best documentary ever? I'll just say it is. It's the best documentary ever. So careful with the books. Careful with the books as a replacement for group. Now, in a way, it can feel like therapy, right? Because the good part about relief is at least you're not in avoidance, at least you're not helpless. So, in a sense, reading a memoir is, it's not Twitter, right? It's way better than Twitter. It's way better than tuning out on the internet. It's way better on just full isolation, staring at your phone. So we can convince ourselves that it is therapy. So I'm not saying to not read biographies and memoirs if you can relate with them. That's great. And if that's all you can do now, then stick with that. I'm just here to say that there's a step beyond this, that you got to keep going. You got to go to a group, and then once you're at a group, you got to relate more and more. And then once you can relate well at group, then you speak to your friends and family, everybody else, the way that you would in group. That's just how you start to talk. And you'll be the most emotional person anybody has ever met, but nobody will ever use that word emotional to describe you. That's what we're going for. And then this next question, something that I've talked about before, I think something today. Well, wait, let me see how much time I have. Oh yeah, we got time for this. One more question here. This listener has children, but she wants grandchildren. So how do I, in a sense, raise my kids so they go on and create families and don't get dogs and pretend that the dog is a kid, right? And in a sense, what went wrong with millennials? Like, why are millennials not procreating in the way that previous generations did? Well, I think this goes back to, I would consider I'm a millennial. I'm part of this issue. I think this listener is a millennial too, so I think we can all relate to some degree. So I have a weird, not a weird, but just interesting take on this, because being a millennial, I know what I went through, and I think I could have gone the way of not getting married, not having kids. And I think what's going on is, this is what I talk about. I've talked about before, like the main issue we see going on now. In fact, anything culturally anomalous, anything that's a cultural anomaly. In my view, there's lots of ways of saying it, but we can take it back to attachment disorder. We can take it back to the narcissism issue of, again, that's why it's so important to talk about narcissism, is because we do see signs of it a lot. So it's vital to get absolutely clear about what it is. And it can't just be, science versus it doesn't exist, observer problem. But I think another way of putting narcissism is attachment disorder, an inability to form secure attachments with another human being. That's why people don't get married, or if they do get married, the relationships are troubled. That's, a very general way of saying it, but I think it's important to put it in these general terms. So if you want to raise children that do not grow up with attachment disorder, you got to show them through a bunch of different ways that relationships are actually a lot of fun. You are built to be in a relationship. They are, I know I just used that word as kind of a pejorative, relief, but they are a relief. When you're around people who you love and who you can connect with, what a relief that is. You can do this in a bunch of different ways. If they bring up something that makes you uncomfortable, or maybe they could get in trouble for, maybe they shouldn't be doing, you remain calm. Not that you're okay with everything that they do, but you at least are calm about it. At least it's something like, no matter what happens to go wrong, I know I can go to my mom and talk with her about it, because, she may not approve and I may get in trouble. I don't know, but overall, she's going to be calm and it's going to be a good experience, and I'm going to be able to relate with her, and I'm just going to get that relief. Just like that sense of connection, that spirit, that capital S spirit that we get when we're around other people and really connecting with them, or that we approximate when we're drinking spirit. I was just watching that South Park Christmas spirit episode, and everybody's low on Christmas spirit, and of course we all know what Christmas spirit means. Or if they're honest with you about something, like let's say they did something wrong, and they're honest with you about it, don't punish them for being honest. I mean, obviously let them know that obviously you shouldn't, but they know, right? They feel bad and they're coming to you and being honest about it. They already know they shouldn't have done it. So reward them. Thank you for being honest. I appreciate that. Now, maybe there's some kind of punishment in there too, but overall, it's, yeah, you were honest about something. I'm disappointed you did that thing, but overall, this is good because you're honest about it. You can talk about it. Just like encourage them to be talking, be open. No emotion is off limits. Like if they're sharing an emotion that's a little bit ugly, it's okay. It's you gotta be there with them. But this, of course, all entails that you become comfortable with your emotions, because actually, I was just thinking about this because I was telling somebody, but before I went to graduate school to become a therapist, I saw a bunch of therapists, and there's just a lot of terrible experiences in therapy. And one of them in particular, I was 25, I think. Yeah, because and I was talking with her, like, I told the therapist, like, so part of my presenting problem going to therapy is, like, I think I might be a bad person. Because up until that point, I've never had a girlfriend. I didn't get my first girlfriend until I was 26. So I thought I might have been a bad person. I thought there might have been something wrong with me, and I might have just been just constitutionally incapable of creating, like, a secure, any kind of long-term relationship with a female. And there's some other reasons for that, like, I don't have to get into it now. It doesn't matter. But the point is like, I really thought this. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not good, And I go and I tell the therapist this, and you know what she says to me? She's like, oh, I'm sure there's lots of great things about you. Oh, you seem like a nice young man. She wasn't that old. She was like maybe 45, 50. And then she starts talking about her daughter. And like, oh, my daughter was going through something similar. And I just like feel... I just remember in that moment, like, the pain of it. Like, the pain of bringing that up, thinking, oh, I just might be a bad person. And it was serious. Like, oh, man, I don't know. There just might be something about me. And not only is it not helpful, but you feel stupid. You feel like an idiot. Like, you get that experience with somebody, and they respond to you that way. You feel like an idiot, and you never want to talk about that. That's at least 2 years now. That's 2 years of you're probably not going to talk about it, because you went to the sensitive place. You try to talk about it, and you just felt like an idiot. And that's what happened when I was in therapy. And so all this is to say, when your kids come to you and maybe share some things with you that may be a little bit ugly, like, man, am I a bad person? You don't say, oh, no, you're a great kid. And what are you doing there? What was that therapist? She's not a bad person, that therapist. What was she doing? She was uncomfortable with what I was talking about, and she wanted to distract away from the emotion. Maybe she felt like she was inherently a bad person, didn't want to look at that. Maybe she might have thought I might have been a bad person, and she doesn't want to think, or she doesn't want to be in the same person with somebody who might think that may be uncomfortable for her. This is what a lot of men do too. This is like a typical male, and we can say, oh, men are just solution focused. Yeah, they're solution focused, but also they may just be uncomfortable with emotions. So be accepting of emotions. But first you got to accept your own emotions to be that, because otherwise you're not going to, be that emotionally connected with your kid whenever they come to you with something, Or, if they criticize you, just like as another example, if they criticize you, accept it. I mean, if they do it in a mean way, then let them know. Like, you can't be mean. I want you to be honest with me, but you can't be mean. If you think I'm doing something wrong, tell me. Let's talk about it. Maybe I am doing something wrong. Everything's a negotiation. We talk about everything. But yeah, this really comes from you. You got to manage your own issues. The more you manage your issues, the more you comfortable are with yourself. And yeah, when you manage your own issues, then you're not using your kids for anything. I guess that's another common pitfall. People will use their kids. I mean, that's a compensation for our inability to validate ourselves. We use our kids to validate us. So our kids need to be a certain way in order for us to be okay. Our kids can't go around thinking they might be a bad person. And there's something about them that's just constitutionally wrong, and they're somehow not fit to be in this world or be a part of a romantic relationship, like I was concerned with. And right, so we so you got to manage your own issues, so you don't put any of that baggage, you don't put any of that lack of inability to validate yourself, lack of ability to validate yourself. You don't place that on your kids, because you will unconsciously use them to validate you. And it's not like, oh, if you're smart, you'll just figure out a way around it. No, it will happen automatically. It is an automatic, unconscious compensation to not getting your own needs met. So let's leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions for me, animus@animusempire.com. We do free consultations if you think I may be able to help you, or if you just want some general guidance and want to be pointed in another direction, I can help you with that too. Free 30-minute consultations, animusempire.com/schedule, and I will leave it there. And I will also wish you all the joy and pain that comes from looking at your neurosis for exactly what it is.